Good afternoon and welcome to today's edition of the Health Equity Collaborative's series on healthcare inclusion. Our guest today is Dr. Mike Ybarra. He is a board certified emergency room physician and he's the vice president of medical affairs at PhRMA. Dr. Ybarra is a graduate of Stanford University and the Georgetown University School of Medicine. He completed his residency training in emergency room at MedStar Washington Medical Hospital Center and is a practicing physician at the MedStar Georgetown University Emergency Medical Department. The Health Equity Collaborative, or HEC, is an organization set up to basically promote health inclusion and parity for underserved communities. Right. We're a digital hub, basically, where we create content such as this to bring more people into the system to understand what the needs are in the healthcare industry and healthcare community to try to better serve many of our citizens.
That's great.
And we love having these conversations with people like you because there's a lot to be learned, and I always say interesting times are a curse as much as they are a blessing, and these are very interesting times, and so your insights are going to be very helpful to the people who are trying to understand how best to serve the populations. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump into the questions, and you can answer them. If you got something else to add, please do, because I know you probably know way more about this than I do. So let's start here. What are the traditional phases of vaccine development? As you know, obviously, everyone's focused on a vaccine. Colleges can't start, schools can't start. We're waiting for a vaccine. We're going to be at home almost 2 years. It looks like, feels like an eternity. Where are we going with the vaccine, and what's the situation for those out there trying to understand?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate the chance to provide the perspective that of industry. PhRMA, we're an association. Our members are the biopharmaceutical companies that make innovative medicines, new medicines, and they are really active in researching new COVID-19 therapeutics, medicines to treat the disease and then also to prevent it, so vaccines. And I think your question is a really good one, because you're right. Everybody's thinking about a vaccine right now, and hoping that we are able to get past the pandemic. And getting back to normal really is going to, likely require a vaccine, because, we need that kind of herd immunity. So I'll take your question in two parts. Number one, like, what does it mean to develop a vaccine? And then number two, where are we at with COVID vaccines? Yeah. Developing a vaccine is a process. Normally it takes many, many years to develop one. And for COVID-19, that research is happening at a really incredible pace. It's happening so fast that people are actually worried we're maybe skipping steps. And that's not the case. Instead, what is happening is companies and researchers are working to create efficiencies. And instead of working kind of in series, step A to step B to step C to step D, we're doing all those things, but in some cases, kind of doing them more in parallel. So trying to create efficiencies, because time is of the essence here. Traditionally, when it comes to a vaccine development, you do preclinical testing. You look at the vaccine in the lab. That can take years sometimes. You do a phase 1 trial, which involves a small number of patients that are healthy, to test if this is safe, what the right dose is. Phase 2 is a little bit bigger, a couple hundred patients, asking somewhat similar questions. And then phase 3 is the largest clinical trial, and that enrolls thousands of patients over a period of time to really determine if the vaccine works and if there are any new safety signals that come out. And right now we are in, there are vaccines, several of which are in phase 3 clinical trials for COVID-19. And the really exciting part of that is that they're using different scientific methods for these vaccines. And that, I think, is really exciting and important, because it means that we have more chances of success. We need to kind of approach this from multiple angles, not just all the same angle, so that we have a higher likelihood of success. And we kind of created efficiencies in the process by sort of like layering things on top of one another. Again, not cutting any corners, just trying to create efficiencies. And part of it is because, we just know a lot more about science than we did even 10 years ago. It took a really short period of time to identify the new virus that causes COVID-19 and then sequence the RNA from that sample. And without having a knowledge of genomes and how to do all of that, it would have taken a lot longer. So we really rely on that basic science knowledge. So we've made a lot of progress. Several companies are in phase 3 trials, and I'll just throw out there one of those trials that's happening right now. Involves me. I actually got to enroll in one on Friday. I enrolled in a phase 3 trial. I got a shot in my left arm, and it's really been an eye-opening experience to participate.
Now, do you know? Did you get a placebo or did you get the real vaccine? Do you know?
I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know, and I won't know for some time.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for putting your life on the line for the rest of us to try to make us safer. So I appreciate you being courageous. And that does actually bring me to another question about inclusion. How are we doing? There's always concern that, and I was part of another panel a couple of weeks ago talking about inclusion of minorities in vaccine trials, because obviously there's those issues, and I've seen it in the news. What is being done currently for this particular vaccine development, but in general, for the industry to get more diversity in the vaccine trials?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that I think it's really been a vexing problem, something that's existed for many years because of historical injustices, because of wrongs that happen, and so I think we really need to make a concerted effort now to really focus on this, and I think now is the perfect time, and we'll probably get to why that is in a few minutes. I was just literally before getting onto this Zoom reading an article about how Pfizer and BioNTech just said that they are close to 20% enrollment of Black and Latinx populations, which is a really, really positive step. They've made a concerted effort to increase enrollment in their clinical trials. And it's going to take a lot of work, a real concerted effort. And I guess based on my own personal experience enrolling in a trial last week, I think one of the big takeaways that I have is how important interpersonal interactions are. We talk and think about these clinical trials like they're these massive regulatory processes, which they absolutely are. There's so much important regulation and background work that has to be done to protect patients and protect individuals. But at the end of the day, it's a healthcare interaction. It's a people to person interaction, just like anything else in healthcare, just like working in the emergency department. The people that I see, they want to know that I'm trained. They want to know that all the safety measures are in place so that they get good care. But it's so much of how that patient, is going to, perceive how that visit went has to do with how I interacted with them. So it was just a really good reminder that it comes down to working with trusted individuals in various communities, building relationships. I interacted with a study site coordinator, somebody on site, a doctor, a nurse administering the vaccine, and all those interactions, they make a really big difference. So one of the things that we're really focused on is how can we build better collaborations with trusted voices in minority communities to get engaged.
So if you don't mind me asking, how did you find out about the trial? Like, for instance, even though I'm part of the Health Equity Collaborative, when you mentioned that, I realized I wouldn't even know how to start to become a part of a clinical trial. So how did that work out? How does that process work?
Well, that's a great question, because I think a lot of people have that same thought. The way I got involved was I went to the NIH actually set up a website where you can type in your information, and then they share that with various clinical trial sponsors. And then I was contacted by one of the companies or by one of the clinical sites that's participating in a company clinical trial, and they kind of went through a series of questions and to see if I was eligible. And so, for me, going to that website and signing up was one thing. It was great that I found out about it. I read about it. Probably I heard about it through working at PhRMA. But then after I signed up, I thought, well, why am I not telling my family about it? Why am I not telling my friends about it? And so that kind of led me to think, well, I have to do my part to share it with my kind of community. And so then we need to build bridges with key voices and minority communities so that, there are trusted voices in the Black community and the Latinx community so that they hear it from people that they trust. So that communication, it actually goes a really long way. It's completely obvious to say that we need to do a better job communicating. But even in my own experience, it was, I had a job to do, and it was a good reminder, I need to talk to my community and my family about it and get them involved as well.
Now that you mentioned, I think, after this conversation, we're going to put that, if you give me that link, we're going to put that link up on our site so people will know. Until you mentioned, I never thought, well, how do you become a member? So thank you. That was good. Second question. We have seen news articles where the House Democrats have been putting pressure on HHS to move swiftly, but also to make sure there's more inclusion in this process on the vaccine development. What are your thoughts on, on how this would work, or how do we ensure, and we may have actually answered this question, but ensure there's an equitable allocation of the vaccine being distributed in various communities?
Yeah, well, I think that's another really important point, which is once we have a vaccine that's kind of demonstrated to be safe and effective, how do we get it to the right communities? And I think there are a lot of folks now thinking through that, which is really important. Like, we need to kind of have a plan and think through it now so that we're ready when we're lucky enough to have a vaccine, and make sure that it reaches those high-risk patient populations, people that have been disproportionately impacted by it, healthcare workers, nursing homes, minority communities. I think the government does have a really important role to play in that. They have in the distribution of other medicines for COVID-19. There are other key organizations right now that are kind of putting together thought leaders, the National Academy of Sciences, for example, engaging key stakeholders to begin those discussions. So I think it's really important, that we as an industry do our part to make sure the clinical trials are enrolling minority populations, and then other key stakeholders also think through some of those logistical and distribution issues.
Now, I guess this is a follow-on, and maybe this answer is already in the public, I haven't heard it. In terms of cost for patients to get the vaccine, I guess if you have good insurance, or like most people with insurance, you'll go get your flu shot, but will the vaccine be made available, or how will it be made available to people who don't have access to insurance, or don't have
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a number of companies have already said that they're going to be pricing the product, at cost, which is a really fantastic commitment. The government has also kind of made clear that they want people to not have to pay out-of-pocket costs. Much like right now, when you go to get a COVID test, there's no cost associated with that for consumers. So I don't anticipate out-of-pocket cost affordability being a barrier to people accessing the vaccine.
Okay. Now, this is as a physician and as a policy an expert, minority communities tend to have suffered more from the virus than other populations. Yeah. What's your experience? What's causing that disparity to be so great at this point?
Yeah, well, I think it's one of the most disturbing parts of the virus that we've seen thus far in the last, however many months we've been dealing with this, 8 months. There's a really clear racial and ethnic disparity to the way that it's impacting patients, the outcomes that they're having. Black communities, Latinx, Native Americans, they're having higher rates of infection, they're having higher rates of hospitalization, higher rates of death. And it's due to a variety of reasons that we're really just beginning to understand. And I think, again, we have a role to play in trying to better elucidate, what's going on here. If we have good data, if we do good kind of research, then we can start to address. I think the data really, the data that we have so far supports what I'm seeing in my own anecdotal experience working in a local ER here. I've seen whole families of folks, families from Latinx communities in the suburban Maryland areas, or Black communities in DC, entire families that are coming in and testing positive. And I think it's clearly related to things that we know, like social determinants of health, that make these communities at higher risk of contracting many illnesses. Housing situation, transportation, the work, the high risk work that they might be doing, or work that puts them at higher risk of infection. And then, of course, the comorbidities that come along with those social determinants of health that put them at higher risk of getting very sick from infection. So there's a lot, there's just so much to unpack there. And I think that this virus has really just kind of uncovered what was already out there. It just drew attention to something that very much is occurring in chronic diseases. And this is a very acute illness, and it's showing it in really the disparities in very acute ways.
I don't want to drag this conversation out too long, but I do want to pick your policy brain outside of the COVID and to talk about these comorbidities. As a policy expert, healthcare, and as a practicing physician, what do you think, minus, large scale societal change, which may take decades, what are some concrete steps we as a country need to take to, mitigate some of these problems beyond the COVID issue? What are you guys working on at PhRMA or your ideas that you're developing to fix this problem or address it?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think, this is all really concerning, and it's something that we have to focus on. I think we're an organization that's really poised to help certainly on the research front. We have a really strong, robust research team that's really committed to working on these issues. We also engaged in a process with our member companies to develop a set of principles as it relates to health equity and racial injustice. And we've really committed to them. We have a great team of folks that are working on it. Courtney Christian, who some might know, who has been working on these issues for many years, some folks on my team as well. And I think, the good thing about this is it's a long-term commitment. It involves, a set of principles that we as an industry can commit to, and we're doing it really publicly. We put the principles in a print ad in the New York Times, and we set up a website, pharma.org/equity, so that we can be really transparent and folks can see what we're working on and hopefully identify areas of collaboration as well.
Okay. Great. Well, I'm going to close out here. I mean, if you any last words of wisdom or thoughts, hopeful or otherwise, about what our listeners should be thinking about as we, spend the next 8 to 10 months battling this one issue, but then knowing that there's a long string of things we have to address after this. Sure.
Well, I think, we've talked about some pretty serious, really serious topics, and sometimes it gets overwhelming. So what can I do on a daily basis? And no matter what situation you're in, the things that I really encourage, my patients, everybody that I work with, folks in my family, is to do the simple things like wear a mask, wash your hands, maintain physical distance. Those things, no matter where you are kind of in the world, will help protect from COVID-19. So just don't forget the simple stuff, even in a very complicated world that we're living in and all the complicated issues that we mentioned. Those are really simple things that we can do. Mask wearing in particular is really important. So.
Well, one last question. We talked about that website. Do you remember the website that you went to sign up for the trial?
Yeah, it's the NIH actually houses it on their site, and it's their accelerating clinical trials. So I'd be happy to send that around to you, and we can send it out as follow-up with the URL. I don't think it's a really short URL, so it might be better to have the long link.
Right, perfect. Well, Mike or Dr. Ybarra, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. It was really good to be with you. Thanks for doing the Zoom.
Bye-bye.